In 2022, Russia thought it could crush Ukraine within days. In the fourth year of its brutal war, Russia is struggling to advance. Russia's military is stretched there and elsewhere. Its Mediterranean task force was once a mix of surface ships, submarines and support vessels. Now, in effect, there is hardly any Russian naval presence in the Mediterranean left. There is a lone and broken Russian submarine limping home from patrol. What a change from the 1984 Tom Clancy novel The Hunt for Red October. Today, it seems more like the hunt for the nearest mechanic.
Russian elites are finally realizing the harsh truth. They may never be able to leave Russia ever again. European authorities are seizing properties left and right from Russian oligarchs, and now the West is preparing the ultimate financial strike, giving Ukraine $300 billion of frozen Russian reserves that are sitting in European banks. This move is triggering total panic. Putin is trying to argue that it should be illegal to siege stuff that belongs to a country. Talk about hypocrisy. All the while, he's threatening to seize the assets of Western companies that are still operating in Russia. You see, the fear of losing $3 billion is now greater than the fear of death. And the financial collapse is so acute that Kremlin TV is literally losing its mind. It's now threatening the West with nuclear help. This is the moment Russia's collapse goes from economic failure to total panic. Take a look at this. A host on Kremlin TV was threatening Western citizens with a nuclear strike, saying the West will die and he will go to heaven. This is when the Polish foreign minister replied, saying this guy was already in heaven when he was in his villa in Italy on Lake Como. The host did not like hearing this. I'm guessing that's because Villa was sieged after Putin launched his senseless invasion. So this is how he responded.
У меня тайные поклонники есть. Радик Сикорский мне написал. Радик.
I have secret admirers. Radek Sikorsky wrote to me. Radek, he is listening our program. Antonina Gerashenko and Radek Sikorsky. Can you take them out? I sent it. So, Radek writes in the band network H. It's cool when he answers you, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. He enjoys it. Sometimes he writes to me in the Foreign Office from England. So, one Ukrainian not it. But what can you do? It's not someone who picks him up. Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Slovit was already in heaven in his villa on Lake Como.
Listen, Radek. You know when we're doing journalism, but didn't achieve anything. He became a public figure in Poland and remained nothing. Antonina Gerashenko is an exhausted, pathetic toad. A faggot. She's trying to quote our program, which was banned for viewing both on your side. But you can't live without us. I just quoted the famous phrase of our commander-in-chief. When are you, Radek, happy that the Jews have taken away their property in enlightened Italy? What could be more traditional? When Banderovitz enjoys. Polish anti-Semite, who avenges all world for unsuccessful married Jew. It's generally a classical scenario.
Наслаждается с польским антисемитом, который мстит всему миру за то, что неудачно женат на еврейке.
Well, this wasn't even the most embarrassing news for Putin. You see, when he launched his invasion, he had roughly $300 to $350 billion worth of assets in Western banks. Most of this was in Europe, but he also had some in US, UK, and Japan. These assets were quickly frozen. That meant Russia could not access them and use them to fund its invasion. This was bad news, but things got worse over the last few months when EU and Western countries as a whole started talking about just giving this money to Ukraine so they can either buy weapons to defend their country or rebuild their country. This is when Putin just lost his mind, saying that it should be illegal to take over something that belongs to another country. I'm not kidding. Listen to this yourself.
The significant amount of Russian gold and currency reserves is frozen in Western banks. And there they are constantly saying that our money will be stolen from us as soon as it happens. The movement towards regionalization of payment systems will certainly accelerate and will be acquired without any doubt of an irreversible nature. And this is useful for the global economy in general. Maybe it's worth paying for that as well. But by the way, I just thought about it because my basic education is legal. I said thefts from our gold and currency reserves are a secret robbery of property, but they're open-ended robberies. So we certainly, of course, we should. We should aim to further strengthen our own financial instruments in this regard. And we will do so by interacting with the participants of Eurozest and other friendly states.
Будем делать это во взаимодействии с участниками Евразеса и другими дружественными государствами.
You see, this is the same old strategy that Russia has used with their nuclear saber rattling. Putin is trying to argue that if West does this, if they take Russian money and give it to Ukraine, no one will trust Western banks in the future. In reality, that's just not true. Now, I'll be honest, financially speaking, legally speaking, this whole issue is a lot more complicated than many people on YouTube are making it out to be. But let's not forget, it was Putin who started an illegal invasion of another sovereign country. So he has no one to blame but himself. But to understand this topic a lot more completely, if that's even a phrase, I hopped on a call with none other than Bill Browder to figure out what's the debate, why has it taken so long for Western countries to even come to this plan, and what's going to happen in the future. Let's listen. I do want to get a little bit of both sides when it comes to the $300 billion, a little bit more than $300 billion that the Western banks are holding or frozen from Russian central bank. I wonder if you can explain for the audience why we haven't seized it. It is frozen, but there's a difference between frozen and seized.
Well, first of all, just so everyone understands, when the war started, one of the strongest measures that the Western allies community took was to freeze the central bank reserves of the Russian Federation. At the time, the Russian Federation had about $650 billion of total central bank reserves. Some of it was held in gold, some of it was held in rubles, but a lot of it was held in dollars, euros, Swiss francs, sterling, etc. And about 300 billion of that was held in these foreign currencies. And what that meant was that when the war started and the West was looking for a tactical policy measure that would punish Russia, one of the first things that was done was to freeze that money because it was held in the West. And that money has remained frozen over the course of the last 3.5 years. And in that time, Putin and his government have, first of all, stolen 20% of the Ukrainian land. And they've created, depending on whose measurements you're looking at, between $500 billion and $1 trillion of damage to the Ukrainian infrastructure, buildings, etc. And so logically, if they've done all this damage, which was not Ukraine's fault, it was Russia's fault, Russia should pay for it. And it just so happens that we're sitting on top of, we in the West are sitting on top of $300 billion of that money. And by the way, the Ukrainians desperately need money in order to prevent Russia from taking over the rest of the 80% of Ukraine. They're defending themselves. And for a long time, the United States and other countries were providing military aid. When Trump became president, he said, we're not going to spend any more money on this. And so America, which provided about 40% of the economic military aid, has withdrawn. That money is even more needed now for Ukraine to continue fighting. And so the logic, of course, is that why should the West continue paying if Putin can pay? And we're sitting on all this money. And so it's a very simple thing from both a moral perspective and a financial perspective that the money should be confiscated and then used for the defense of Ukraine. Now, there are complications in that. The main complication is that, in theory, under law, under an international law, the Russian government's money, their central bank reserves, are similar to their embassy, which is protected by what's called sovereign immunity, which means that it's sort of their sovereign territory, it's their sovereign money, it's their sovereign embassy. You can't take it. Now, in practice, that is not an absolute protection because Ukraine, their territory is also protected by sovereign immunity. And so if Russia does all this damage, then Ukraine has a claim against Russia. And so the complication eventually comes back to which is more important, Ukraine's claim against Russia for the $1 trillion of damage they've done, or Russia's claim that their money should be absolutely protected by sovereign immunity. And I think that ultimately it's not even a legal question, it's a political question. You know, should the West allow the Russians to wiggle out of responsibility hiding behind this fig leaf of international law? And the answer is, of course, no, they should not be. And that money should be confiscated. And we're now at a point 3.5 years in when the political pressure is becoming too high, the economic pressure is becoming too high for governments to allow Russia to continue to evade responsibility. And my prediction is that over the course of the next few months, we're going to actually see that money being transferred for the defense of Ukraine.
That makes sense. I do have two follow-up questions just so we understand this, at least me, because I've been researching this. So first one is, of course, are politicians in Europe worried about like some kind of capital flight? Like if they do something like this, other foreign countries will take away their money from like deposits in Europe? And the second is like, would that affect the bond market where, the European countries that are borrowing money to fund their budgets? Would that affect the interest rate in any way? Or is that something like not even worth thinking about because it's a remote possibility?
So if you were to speak to the head of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she'll tell you under no circumstances can you take this money because it would create a catastrophe for the euro. And of course, that would also affect the bond markets. That's an interesting position for her to take, but it seems to be not necessarily a realistic position because, first of all, the Europeans would not do this by themselves. The Europeans would do this in concert with the United States, with the UK, with Switzerland, with Canada, with Japan, Australia. And if all major allied countries took the same decision at the same time, then the question is, well, where's the capital going to fly to? So let's say we're talking about Saudi Arabia or China that have a bunch of dollars or euros that they're currently holding outside of their own country. Well, first of all, the Chinese, for example, where do they get their dollars from? They get their dollars from selling more cars and radios and whatever. Now, if they brought all that money back and they converted it back into their own currency, what would happen to the Chinese currency? It would go up. And if it goes up by too much, then they don't export as much stuff, and they don't want that to happen. So that's why they keep their dollars offshore. That's why they keep money in foreign currencies. And so then the question is, okay, if they have to keep their currency offshore in order not to create an overvalued currency at home, which then makes it impossible to export, then what currency do they hold it in offshore? Well, if you can't hold it in dollars, euros, sterling, Swiss franc, Japanese yen, what are you left with? Well, I don't think the Chinese are going to save their money in Argentine pesos or Iranian rials. They have to hold one of these reserve currencies. And so that's the dilemma that all these countries have. And so for Christine Lagarde or people like her to be running around like Chicken Little and saying the sky is going to fall if you do this, are sort of ignoring the reality, which is that there's nothing else that these people can do. They're stuck with these currencies. And sure, on the very, very far margin that you can buy a little bit of cryptocurrencies or gold or whatever to avoid this, but you can't do that on a major export economy. That you have to hold reserve currencies, which is why they are reserve currencies, and they're not going to lose that status at any time soon.
Now, Putin is starting to realize that he cannot do much to stop Western countries from giving this money to Ukraine. And that's why he's now trying to blackmail the world. This time he's doing it by threatening the sale of foreign assets inside Russia. Now this is where I want to give you guys some important context. Back when Russia launched its invasion, it was sanctioned by almost every country in the world. After that, Western companies could not operate in Russia without facing backlash and even legal problems. So they decided to put up their assets for sale and leave. This is where Putin decided to seize the companies. Now, technically speaking, he did not seize it in the legal term. That's because the Russian government decided to buy out a lot of these companies for $1 each. So it's not a seizure, and Putin has been using this argument to frame that, hey, Russia is not the Soviet Union where we capture private property. And he's doing this because he paid $1 for assets that were worth billions. But you see, even after all this, there were still some companies like European banks like UniCredit and Raiffeisen, and on top of that, American companies like PepsiCo, Modelis, who did not leave Russia. Now, I don't understand why these companies are just allowed to operate in Russia without any legal issues, but that's not the topic of this video. Well, for these companies, now Putin is turning on that. Putin is now threatening that he's gonna take over these companies as payback for Western countries taking over Russian $300 billion. This is where I wanna come back to Bill Browder, who said it a lot better than I could. When these companies decided they were gonna continue operating in Russia and profiting in Russia, even after Russia was killing innocent Ukrainian civilians, they sealed their future. Now these companies should not come running to Western countries to seek help. They have no one to blame but themselves. But anyways, coming back to the European issue, it seems the finance ministers of a lot of European countries are meeting next week, and in this meeting, they want to start the process of handing over this money to Ukraine. They're not going to do it in a direct way because that opens a lot of legal issues. But the way they're going to do it is they're going to buy bonds using this money and then use those bonds as collateral to give a loan to Ukraine that equals roughly 80% of the value. And then Ukraine is free to do whatever they want with this money they get from the loan. But you see, Ukraine doesn't technically have to pay back the loan unless, of course, Russia decides to pay after this war is over. In reality, you and me both know Russia is never going to do it, even if Putin is not here. That means European countries who are giving this loan to Ukraine are just going to use the bonds that is being bought right now using Russian money to pay back the loan. That way Ukraine doesn't have to pay it back, and they also get access to the money that they need so desperately to buy weapons and rebuild the country. This is a lot more complicated topic than many people are making it out to be, and even after finishing this video, I don't feel like I explained it completely, and that could be because I don't understand it completely, and that could be because maybe I don't understand it completely. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to comment them down below, and we'll try to clarify that in the future as much as we can. That's it for today. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below because we are trying to hit 2 million subscribers before the end of the year, so your support really does help us out.